Okay, I'm Simon Boxer. I'm actually the climate team leader of Greenpeace, and climate change is probably the biggest issue that Greenpeace is working on, also in New Zealand as well. What I'm going to show today though is how we're actually witnessing the first major steps in watching the climate collapse in front of our eyes, which is actually in the Arctic. But then it's to tell a story of how the fossil fuel industry, who are creating this situation for us, are now looking to profit from the fact that the ice is disappearing and there's lots of new seabed to be drilled. But also I think, you know, everyone sits in these sorts of presentations and starts to think, I'm going to be depressed by the end. But I'm actually going to tell a story that by the end I think you'll see that we're living through momentous times. Yes, there are challenges, but actually we are really witnessing a revolution globally that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to make it, and that actually, you know, although we will still have problems, it's not going to be as bad as everyone expected. Fingers crossed. So Save the Arctic. This is probably Greenpeace globally, which is made up of around 4 million supporters. We have offices in 28 countries. Every single member of Greenpeace is working on this campaign right now. This is probably the biggest global campaign we have fought since the French nuclear weapons testing in Mururoa. And we actually are determined to see this to the end. There will be no stopping on this campaign until the Arctic is actually saved from the direct effects of oil and also industrial fishing that's going in. But really, I don't know if you ever thought you'd see it in your lifetime, but to really witness one of the most pristine parts of the planet that we presumed would always be pristine, would always be protected, that industrialization would never actually take place, is actually, we're seeing this year has started. And Shell are at the heart of this. They are the first oil company who've decided to go in there. But there are many in the big oil industry who are lining up right behind them. They're aiming to open up the entire Arctic to drilling. So obviously it's an incredible pristine environment. It's a commons that is owned by all people. It belongs to all of us. It doesn't belong obviously to big oil companies who are going to move in there. And the important thing, it's a very unique world. It's taken millions of years for this environment to form, and also that is overlooked sometimes. There are 4 million people living, indigenous people living in the Arctic, who have adapted there over tens of thousands of years. And part of our work is working with them as much to protect them as it is to protect the incredible wildlife and the unique pristineness of the area. But you know, we have species there that exist nowhere else, species that are already feeling the real impact of climate change, and obviously adding industrialization to that fragile environment is potentially going to tip some of those species to extinction. And I think the other aspect about the Arctic is that it's really essential for controlling the climate globally. Even people in New Zealand are dependent on the role that the Arctic plays within our world's global climate system. And already they're starting to realize that as the Arctic warms up, it's actually the fastest part of the planet warming up at this moment. By doing that, it's having a perverse effect on weather in the Northern Hemisphere. So already they're able to link the massive droughts that have been occurring in Russia, US, Europe, specifically to the fact that the Arctic is warming up. And that's something no one knew only, say, 2 years ago. And that's really starting to understand that the dramatic weather that we just saw of Hurricane Sandy is absolutely linked to what's going on in the Arctic. And so we've had a dramatic loss of ice occurring for a couple of decades, but it's only since about 2004 that the alarm bells sounded. So there you have the normal, if you like, the summer melt. Obviously winter comes, a large part of the Arctic is ice. Summer comes, it gets hotter, it shrinks. So that's normal. So this is the normal sort of shrinkage, and that's the area you normally see, and that's the average. What we've been witnessing, this is in 2007, was a dramatic shift whereby we had a huge amount of ice missing during the summer. This year that we just witnessed, that's even worse than the 2007 melt. So something I never thought I would see in my lifetime was the fact that within 10 years, scientists do believe that the North Pole will be open water during the summer. And that's really significant. Also that within maybe 20 years to 30 years there'll be no ice anywhere on the sea of the Arctic Ocean, thanks to climate change. And that's a massive, massive shift. And the scary thing is none of the climate scientists and experts, none of them knew this was coming. It doesn't fit any of the models. They never saw, they still don't actually know why it's falling over so quickly. It's still a big surprise to them. And they're scrambling to try and work out why. Why, with the climate models not predicting that we would be losing this much ice so soon. This was actually meant to happen in 2030, what we're seeing today. So that's telling us, that's a big alarm bell going off that something's wrong. The problem we have, of course, is that the oil industry see all this open ocean during the summer as their golden opportunity to drill for oil. And the interesting thing about that, you know, they try and present it as we all need oil, it's fundamental, we've got to do it, we have to make the hard choices. And yet what they're not telling anyone is that if you drilled every last barrel of oil out of the Arctic, it's 90 billion barrels, sounds like a lot, but that's only 3 years of global oil consumption. That's how much oil we use. That's how addicted we are as a species to oil. So for 3 years of global oil, we're going to take this massive risk with massive potential for things to go wrong. And the bottom line is Shell and the other oil companies are trying to profit, make a direct profit. They're not so interested in providing the world with lots of energy. It's about their business. They need that oil. That oil will keep Shell and the other oil companies going for 20 years for them. That's why they're doing it. It's not for us, it's for them. And when you look at the huge scale of what they have planned right around the Arctic, it just shows you that they are absolutely serious. They have moved in to the Chukchi Sea and the Barents Sea. And this is where Greenpeace has been doing work. We've had our ships out there, we've been protesting. And interestingly, because of the global spotlight we brought on them, they couldn't actually drill for the oil this year. And that's because they didn't have any of their safety cases done. Their vessels were actually really shocking in how old they are. One of the drilling rigs that was down in New Zealand, which I'll show you that we were involved with, actually ran aground off the coast of Alaska because it's a really shocking vessel. And at the end of it all, they said, we have this amazing new technology. We're gonna, if there's a blowout of oil, we will put a new cap there and it will just solve it. So they had to test this cap. And then during the test, they broke it. And as a result, the US authorities, who have been bending over backwards for them, said, no, you can't actually drill for oil this year. So $4 billion is what they've spent on those two drilling rigs so far in terms of opening this up. And that really speaks to the fact that if they didn't have that spotlight that we were all bringing and all the public attention, they'd have been allowed. They'd have, okay, well, we'll take the risk. That is absolutely what would have happened. So in a way, that's where the campaign so far has really started to work. But the important thing is that the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico in 2010 is a real pivotal moment in the history of energy in the world. Because this wasn't just any old accident, this was an accident that's deep water. And what it showed is that suddenly there's a huge amount of drilling occurring in deep water. Why? Because all the easy to get oil has actually disappeared. It's really going out fast. We call it peak oil at the moment. And so they're being forced to take more risks, go to deeper waters, go to the Arctic, and really try and open up more and more frontiers. And that really tells you that their days are numbered. And so obviously, if society allows them to take these risks, if these types of disasters are going to occur, year on year, and we allow that, then obviously they can go ahead. But if actually we say, no, it's time now to find the alternative, because actually the age of oil is over. Even the oil industry will say they're lucky if they're going to be supplying oil within 30, 40 years from now. It's a finite resource, and there isn't that much out there. Obviously, in the case of the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, the impacts are massive. It's an area the size of North Island, New Zealand, that was closed to fishing alone. But the impacts went right into the Atlantic, right around the whole Gulf. There was a big cover-up going on by the US administration together with the oil industry. We've just managed in the US to expose all these photos of whales that had died that were actually deemed too sensitive and were covered up. We've managed to get those out. So the impact on the wildlife is still going on. There's actually a major dolphin die-off at the moment occurring this year, where they believe it's something to do with impacting on reproduction of the dolphin species there. So the impacts are long, long lasting, long after the oil disappears off the beaches that the tourists sit on. So obviously if you take the Gulf of Mexico and you bring that into the Arctic, we're talking even more dangerous, because actually when you consider that you have oil released and then the ice during the winter will come back, there is no open ocean for ships or drilling rigs to get in. And actually the thing that's interesting about when you have a blowout, there is no capping technology at work. So the only way to deal with it, you have to drill more holes down the side of it and try and get into the original hole and pump concrete into it. It's your only option. So obviously if you have a blowout in the Arctic and it's near the end of the drilling season, because the drilling season's only around 5 months at the most, then obviously they have to move away. It will keep on blowing out thousands and thousands of barrels a day. 2 years of a blowout uncontrolled going on. In that time you'd see massive amounts of oil going all over the place. And these are tests that have been done by the oil industry, just small tests. And what they worked out is you can't get rid of the oil. It's there, it's really difficult to get rid of. So obviously we've started a campaign globally. It's quite a simple campaign in that we're saying the Arctic should be declared off limits to industrialization of the oil industry, mining, or actually industrial fishing, where obviously fishing fleets are looking to move in there. So obviously with Lucy Lawless we managed to bring attention to the drilling rig. This is a Noble Discoverer that's drilling one of the wells in the Arctic, and that really launched a massive campaign worldwide. It was one of the biggest stories in the US on this issue for 10 years. So as a result of that, there's been this huge amount of momentum to try and claim this. Looks like a complicated map, but very simply, we're going to declare the Arctic, on behalf of humanity, a global reserve, a sanctuary, where actually the indigenous people and the wildlife will be left alone. There'll be no industrialization. The indigenous fishing will go on, the sustainable way in which they live will go on, but actually we're trying to keep out that massive oil industry and fishing industry from moving in and destroying the last remains of that. To achieve that, we're actually looking at making a groundswell, making this one of the biggest environmental issues in the last 20 years. And we had a launch in Rio, at the Rio conference, and we've got lots of big name people, not just celebrities, but actually business people, all sorts of explorers, scientists, who really believe that this is a line in the ice that should not be crossed. So as a result of that, we have actually managed to get over 2 million people have signed up to a declaration. Those names, including New Zealand. New Zealand actually is one of the best responses per person in the world. We're at about 70,000 people in this country so far, and it's only been going since June. Those signatures we're going to be actually putting them into a capsule, and we're going to lower it through the North Pole ice to the seabed bottom, which is actually 4,000 meters deep. And it's only a temporary time capsule, and it's going to be there, and it's really to show that everyone in the world is trying to claim this as a global commons, and that it's the start of a movement to get the United Nations and all the governments to then say, okay, we're going to declare it. It's a bit like Antarctica back in the 1990s, early 1990s, is that it was basically a whole process to try and open it up for mining. And the environmental movement, Greenpeace, we actually went and set up a base there. We said, no way. And after a lot of work from lots of people around the world, it was declared a sanctuary. That mining treaty was turned into a protection treaty. And that's what we see as really the opportunity that's coming for the Arctic. We can do it again. It is possible. Closer to home, of course, we are also considered one of the new frontiers for the oil industry, for deep water drilling. These are just some of the areas that the government has opened up to international oil companies to start drilling in deep waters. So most of these colours here are the same depth or deeper than the Gulf of Mexico, where the Deepwater Horizon disaster took place. New Zealand has worse regulations on the oil industry than anyone in the world. Nigeria has better regulations on the oil industry than we do. So we are absolutely starting a game of Russian roulette. We have no idea how we're going to stop a blowout from any one of these areas. Because if you consider that the Gulf of Mexico, as the blue area shows, which is hard to see, but it's the North Island could be closed to fishing, areas of ocean. The incredibly unique species down here that are completely threatened, that could be pushed over the edge to extinction if there was an uncontrolled blowout. And it's interesting that the oil industry themselves admit that we could be looking at 6 months to a year before they could actually stop a blowout here. So that's the sort of risk we're taking. In the US, the Deepwater Horizon disaster has cost the US economy over $40 billion US. That's 2 Christchurch earthquakes for us. That's the economic cost alone in terms of our fishing, tourism, our clean and green reputation. That's the scale of the risk. It would devastate our economy, let alone the environment. And yet the government pushes on and the fight goes on. Obviously there are many people in the country, there's lots of iwi fighting this wherever they've been proposed for one of these drilling sites. And the environmental movement as well is fighting us to try and actually stop this insanity. And I do believe this is a campaign that will be won within the next 5 years because the risks are just too great. I think New Zealanders will make a choice that actually this isn't the way forward to actually grow our economy. And in fact, just quickly to end on a different note, is that we are witnessing a revolution in energy at this moment globally. The things that I am seeing I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. We're seeing Germany this summer. In Germany, 50% of their daytime electricity was generated by solar power. Extraordinary. You know, the 4th largest economy in the world. The wind energy that is taking off around the world. And most importantly, China. China is now the world's leader in renewable energy. In wind, solar. 1 in 10 Chinese homes now has solar water heating. I mean, it's massive. And they're really going for it as well. So the US, China, Europe, just about anywhere you look now, there is this massive explosion in clean energy. So much so that, forget the figures, but these are the official figures. There's more money being invested in renewable energies right now, this last year, than in all the oil and gas exploration production. That includes Iraq, Iran, includes the Gulf. You think of that massive amount of money that goes into oil industry. There's more going into the renewable industry, and that's set to double within the next 5 years. And that's really changing the shape of what's happening on the ground. And yet what's interesting is that this is quite a crucial issue for New Zealand. It's not just about the environment, it's about our economy. In that our economy has real expertise in clean energy. We are leaders in some of the key areas like geothermal. And if you consider that globally what's called the clean technology sector last year was worth $6 trillion US, which I can't imagine, then even if we get just a little percentage of that market, that is big changing economics for us. That's like 2 Fonterras just within geothermal or within some of the other areas, you know, like forestry, etc. So that's the opportunity that's waiting for us. It's got massive implications for creating jobs, green jobs. It's going to be where we could actually lead the world in providing countries like Indonesia, China with geothermal. We are the world's greatest geothermal developers. We do things in our geothermal areas that no one else in the world can do. So there's just one area where we can specialize and bring jobs back and money back to New Zealand. But the key thing is all of this is building on our clean and green reputation. Whereas if we go down the oil path in this choice, then yes, there's some money there, but there's also massive risk, and that our clean and green reputation could be finished. We saw with the Rena, which was a very, very small spill compared to anything here, that, you know, it had an impact on tourism, fishing, had a big impact on people's way of life as well in New Zealand. That's why everyone was down on the beach with a bucket and shovel, because we weren't going to leave it to the government to clean up. So that's really the missed opportunities. We have a choice to make in New Zealand. It's about growing our economy the smart way, the clean way, or letting the government take us down a path that's only going to lead to disaster. And then ultimately, even by 2050, and I would say earlier, personally, it is not beyond the realm that we are going to see the end of fossil fuels being used for energy. It's great. It's actually doable. If you look at that revolution worldwide, then what you can see is that not only are we going to make it in time for climate change and protect places like the Arctic, because we won't need the oil, that actually our kids and grandchildren do have a chance. We have a race until 2020. That's when they think we reach the climate tipping point. And 2 years ago, I wasn't very optimistic. Now, when I see what goes on in Italy, like Italy in 1 year, they built 7 nuclear power stations equivalent, so that's massive, of solar energy in 1 year. It's like, I didn't think that was possible. You watch China, you watch the US, it's really, really going in the right direction. So, you know, my only message for everyone is to get involved. Don't just sit on the sidelines and let the government dictate the choice for us. Is to get vocal through the media. Nearly got there. So the opportunities there is a clear choice for New Zealand. We reckon that the good choice is going to grow the economy, improve our clean and green reputation, give us good paying long-term jobs, and actually make us leaders in the world on renewable energy, and actually show that it can be done. And I reckon, you know, the majority of New Zealanders believe in that, and so we're going to really push a big campaign in the coming years to achieve this and actually deliver it and see a complete shift. We stop the oil, we go for the clean energy. So the message of hope, I hope, for you. Thank you.